and this is Brooklyn Pony Part 8. If you've been following along, you know that I've done obviously 7 other videos on this, and this is a 66 Mustang convertible that I'm basically building from the ground up. The original car was from New York, had a lot of rust, and was falling apart when I got a hold of it, and so I've salvaged what I could out of that car. And the salvage pieces were basically this structure right here, which is the back seat, and then also the convertible top support, the rain gutter, and various panels that connect to it, and the deck filler, short piece back here on top. Saved all that as an assembly. And then the dash, A-pillars, and windshield frame. So anyway, if you followed along, you know that I started with this basic floor pan from Dynacorn, which is for a convertible. I added the exterior rocker panels, or the outboard rocker panels, the wheel houses, and the last video dealt with installing the B-pillars. And everything was done, test fitting and mocking up panels as I went, and so I'm very confident that everything fits very well. Like I said in the previous video, I installed these B-pillars, or B-plates. People can use different terms for these, but basically that's how they're sold, as a B-pillar. And there are 3 pieces to that. There's the forward piece that you see where the striker would be exposed here, and then this inner plate which holds the nut plate assembly that the striker would mount to, and then this angled support brace. Now of course the convertibles are different from the coupes. The convertibles have this extra rocker panel on the inside, so you've got 3 pieces. You've got an outer rocker, the normal inner rocker for like a coupe car, and then this inner structure. So the coupe would not have this, and there's various other pieces that are also only associated with the convertible. Okay, so as I move along, I want to show you a couple other things that I've done. As an example, all the seams I sprayed. There's a big old bug. I don't know what that was, but all the seams I sprayed with self-etch primer from SEM, and once it dried, I applied Eastwood's brushable seam sealer. So any of these seams have paint inside of them, and then the seam sealer on top. And just to show you, this is the self-etch, and then brushable seam sealer. And then all my weld joints I use 3M, there's a part number for that, weld through 2 primer. So in this process, as I'm doing this kind of work, I want to point out a few things as well. You know, you don't have a very easy access to areas like this, or the backside here, or anything if you have the quarter panel on. So at this point I'm addressing small items. You know, I've had to weld this tab here and then weld on the backside, which would normally be a braze joint on the original cars, but I welded it on the backside. Well, then I sprayed all that because this is my opportunity to treat it. Also same with seam sealer down in this pocket right here. The wheel houses, you know, the back edge with the paint in place, and then seam sealer. Also the rain gutter. I know it's hard to tell because I top coated it, but there's seam sealer brushed in all along the seam, as a, you know, and I don't even think it had it out here originally. I think it only had it on the inside, which I've also brushed, and I'll paint later. But on the outside I don't believe it had anything, because they didn't do a lot of extra to these cars when they built them. So those areas are treated and taken care of. And what else was there? Just to show you some of where the wheelhouse meets the quarter, all that's been taken care of. Okay, now at this point the plan is I want to install the quarter panels, but I also need to install that structure. And I should point out, when I removed this was part of the original panel that I cut out. It was in very poor condition, very pitted, because this just made it against the original floor pan. There was no treatment to this. This was just metal to metal, and then allowed, you know, basically to have rust develop between the 2 pieces. So what I did is I made that piece, that lower half. I used this as a template and just copied it. And I did use a little bit heavier gauge steel and welded it in, and that'll make it more than solid when I install that. Now, when this goes in, there are a few things that become important. You got a flange back here, a flange here, a flange here. This goes to the wheelhouse, and then this series of holes, this series of holes right here mates to these holes. And so when I took this apart, I made sure to use those as reference points when it goes back together. Now, all these pieces, all these silver pieces are from dynacorn, and I'm glad they make these. If you look here, this piece, obviously the silver piece, is a new piece, and that's the old piece. And where that piece goes is up here against the wheelhouse. And I can show you with the passenger side. It sits like that. And I'll get it back up so you can see a little better. Now, of course, it'll go up against, tight up against the wheelhouse, but you can see I've drawn lines on it as well. Those are the mating points for that assembly that I'm going to put in. You can see the black lines there, and there's one back there. But anyway, I just wanted to show you that goes in and holds everything in place. And there's a difference between these from what the original pieces were made from, or made to look like. If you look, there's a flange right here, and you can see where the corners are, hopefully. So this was two pieces when it was installed new from the factory. Well, dynacorn makes it all out of one piece, and that's okay, but I don't think it leaves enough room for an exact fit. It'll be very close, and I will make it fit, but it's not exactly the same as the piece that came out. Another thing I want to point out is on this piece, the original, you see that bolt head. You see this inner structure right here, that was for the seatbelt. That doesn't exist on the dynacorn piece. So we may have to do something with that later on. And it won't be hard to do, because all you have to do is drill a hole, get one of these plates, and put it on the backside. And I may even be able to salvage those plates from the donor car that's out here, because there's the pieces right there where the original seatbelt's mounted on the inboard side, or the pieces on the outboard mounted back there. And that's why those seatbelts were relocated, because this new piece covers up the original locations. So at this point, the plan is to set, I believe I'll be setting this piece in place, and also these two support pieces, and then I'll weld in these first, get them tacked in and get them solid, and then pull that get them tacked, let's say that, pull that back out, and then go back in and weld this back in place completely. I should also note that the original piece, you see this curve right here, that wasn't welded to anything. It was not welded to the original floor. It had a weld. It had welds back here on the edge. It had welds here where it went to the floor pan, and it had welds on the edge up here where it met the wheelhouse. So really, not a whole lot of welds, but enough to obviously hold it in place. So I will duplicate some of that. It's hard to do when you don't have the exact same setup. But I did note when I was taking this apart that there were no welds here, and those welds would be basically, if they did exist, would be on top of the seam sealer. So I'm not going to worry about those. Okay, the other thing I'm going to do is install the quarter panels. Now I didn't film myself drilling holes. I know It gets kind of boring seeing stuff like that. So I did all the prep work, got my holes drilled, all coated with the zinc weld through, welded or drilled holes in this bottom flange where it meets the rocker panel, and of course the holes that meet the B pillar or B plate. And I'll go into more details when I get the quarters installed. So, oh, one other thing. On the original car, and I have this piece laying here, this is some of the leftover, there was this plate. I don't think anybody makes these, or I don't know if they make them or sell them or not, but this one was obviously pretty poor shape, and in worst case scenario I would just remake this. I don't know how critical this gap, this opening is. It doesn't really make any sense to me why it's even there, but I salvaged the pieces out of the donor car. So this is actually the driver's side panel. Nice shape. That'll go over there, and then here's the passenger side clamped in place, and I still have to weld that in. But it's just an odd piece. I mean, I know that the slot down here is for the window channel or the window assembly. Other than that, I don't see it doing much. I don't know why it has this slit cut in it. I really don't know. And it had seam sealer down here. Down here on this edge, but it was only intermittent. It wasn't very well done. So I'm not even sure it really needs a seam sealer, but I'll look into that as I go along. Now you can see what I was talking about. There's the side support. Same thing over here. It makes contact at this point right here. It's kind of hard to see through my vice grips, but there's another plate contact point down there, and then obviously where it meets the wheelhouse. And so I may have to push that over a little bit to make it make contact, but that's fine. And then back, you can see where it matches the wheelhouse. So that even, to me, makes me feel even better with the fitment, because having measured and aligned and positioned everything many times, this kind of verifies the fitment, because that panel has not been modified other than that lower section that I put on, and so it fits like it should, and I'm very happy with that. So now I'll get those side plates welded on and move on from there. Okay, so I did pull out the inner structure, like I said, double checked everything around the edges. Everything's fitting very nice. And so at this point, what I'm going to do is weld in the main structure. So that's going to involve a series of welds here at the bottom, over on the edges, some internal welds. It's kind of hard to see, there's some holes in there, and this back edge, and then also the sides there, and then that inner flange right there as well on both sides. I'll weld both of those. So that's next. Alright, so all the welds are done on this inner structure. Everything on the side here. All the edges inside and out. I know it's kind of hard to see some of that. And then everything on the back is welded in place. And I just used the old holes that were from the original assembly. And in there. If it didn't have a hole, I didn't make one. So that's all fitting very well. And the next part of this will be putting the quarter panels on. And as like I said, I've already prepped the quarter panels. They're already drilled and ready to go. So I'll get those in place. Oh, I should point out, I welded in these little support plates that I'd salvaged. So they're in. And of course I will put some paint on those before I put the quarter on and verify there's no other areas inside that need paint. I think it's looking pretty good. Before I start hanging the quarter panels, there's a few things I wanted to take care of. And I know it's hard to see with this light, but we have the two holes here, two bolt holes, maybe it's easier to see on the other side, that are part of, there you go, those two holes that are part of the mounting point for the, however you want to call it, the window track or the window assembly. And with the dynacorn panels, they give you new pieces. And basically this would just bolt right on, supposed to bolt right on. But I don't know if you can see the holes or not. They're not on. In fact, the original piece from the donor car is a lot closer than the dynacorn piece. And I think the problem is they didn't put these holes in the right location, or just slightly off. But if you compare the two, doing some measuring from inside to inside, on the dynacorn piece, it's 1.790 inches, inside to inside on the factory piece, it's 1.86. Not a big number. But then you look on to the outside of the edge, and the dynacorn is 2.580, and the original piece is 2.630. And if you compare these back to back, you can see the edge of the dynacorn piece coming through, or beside. There you go. So it's just an observation, but I want to point it out because if you're working on something like this and you put the quarter panel on, then you want to, come in later and put this bracket on, you're going to be angry at yourself or angry at somebody because you're not able to get this on. There's no way I'm going to be able to get both bolts in those two holes. You can see it's half an edge there, or a little, not quite half of a hole on this right side. So my plan is I will oblong the opening. I will take what I call a rotary file and open up the edge. You can see how there I marked it. I will open up the edge on that hole so that I can install these brackets. I think on this side it would work almost as is. It's still a little bit off, and I may have to do the same thing to both brackets, but it's just an observation. I want to point out some details when I find them and let it be known. This is what I'm talking about. If you can see it, a rotary file, or a burr as it's called, goes in a straight air grinder. And of course you want to have gloves on and hearing protection, and of course safety glasses. The idea is I'm going to grind out where the black mark is. Pardon the noise. And now you see that it fits. So I'll do the same thing to the other side, and I won't have to deal with that later. Well, I think I have all the details covered that I want to share in this portion of the video. At this point, everything's painted, like I said. Everywhere there's a weld, it's been painted, seam sealed. And so I think it's time to start hanging the quarter panels. Make some progress on that. Now I should point out here a little bit, this inner portion here that goes to where the rear quarter windows open up, obviously it's going to slide over the top of that, but as I do this, this portion here, which meets with the deck filler, I have to come underneath that. So it's kind of a twisting motion or a rotating motion coming in from the front, coming in like that. Hope that makes sense. It may not. So I'll drop the front over, bring the backside across and up, made it to the wheelhouse. Alright, so with those in place, I've got a nice even gap at the bottom. It's real nice and tight on the wheelhouse. I know it's hard to get the camera around in there, but it's real nice. Sorry, I don't know where I'm aiming. There it is. The bottom edge is flush with the drop-off panel from the inside. The seam up here where it meets the deck filler, nice and even. And there you can see where I'll clamp that before I weld it, obviously. And I'm going to show you something a little bit, but I talked about these corners having issues because they don't make them fit right. Well, this one, I reshaped it, and so it'll line up evenly with the original overlap here. And I talked about this one being a problem, and it's still a problem. But what I'll do, and I'll show you how I do this, I'll unroll this flange of metal and reshape this and then bend that back so that it matches the shape as it should. I've also got the clamp on the inside here where the two flanges meet, same as on the other side. There you go. And again, the fitment is the same on the driver's side. Nice and even, so I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to point out some things. Whenever I do these, of course I'm going to put the tail panel on before, clamp it in place before I do anything else. But when I do these and I weld them together, I'm not going to weld the whole thing right now. And what I mean by that is I'm not going to weld the front edge of the quarter panel, because when the fitment of the door comes into play, I don't want to have this in a fixed location and then I can't move it to match the door, or if I need to just give it a little bit of a nudge one way or the other, because you can move this around a little bit and change, you know, the alignment. So I'm not going to weld that yet, and I may not weld all of these up here on top just yet, but I can weld this location. More than likely I can weld all of the wheel arch opening, because I really can't change that. Where that sits against the wheelhouse, I'm not going to be able to move. Same way with the bottom. I could probably just weld that and that'll be fine. But again, I'm going to put the tail panel in place before I do any welding, and also set the deck lid back on and make sure everything lines up. Before I do install or locate the tail panel, I think I pointed out before some of my drill patterns, and basically you can see here I'm just putting 3 holes up at the top, and then I'm going to put one just below this mount hole, one going up, and then I'll do basically it'll be 3 altogether here on this edge. But you can also see the pattern, hopefully you can see it, that I laid out. And there's nothing specific about the pattern except for you don't want to have a weld where the balance panel will bolt on, or as it is attached by screws. So if you see these long hash marks, I went ahead and checked the location of the holes on the balance panel, and I can show you that. And basically I just lined up the cutouts and then put hash marks at each one of those locations. It just makes it easier whenever you're laying stuff out to be a little proactive, and that way you're not having to deal with drilling through a weld to put your screw in. And so that's just how I do it, just an observation. I want to point out another detail that probably most people wouldn't even think about, but in this case I want to just show you something. The holes for the valance panel are already here in this dynacorn pan, and I've already checked the valance panel, and it lines up right on the money where it should be with each one of these holes. Now when you put the tail panel on, you're going to cover these holes. It's going to be hard to locate them, and you know, you can try to set the balance panel in place, but you may never hit the exact holes. Now granted, these holes are maybe just a little bit different across the panel, or the overhang here, but what I do is I measure from the bottom edge. In this case it's 20-30 seconds. This one's 12, 14, and so on, because there can be some variance there. Here's 16. And I've written the numbers down not only here, I don't know if you can see that okay, but also on the underside of the panel here. And what that'll do for me is whenever I set the tail panel on, now I have a reference point that I can come back to. I've got a center line on the hole. I've got a distance from the bottom edge to the top. So once the tail panel is in place and fully welded in, I can come back and remeasure that, drill a pilot hole, and be comfortable with where I'm at and step it up a little bit if I need to, or just use the screw to go on through that. So just an observation, something I wanted to point out. And again, I'm going to show you something else when I get to this point with the tail panel, with this difference in the gap here at the quarter. It'll be a relatively simple fix, and I've shown this on other videos, but I'll show you what I do here when I get to that point. Before I fully set the panel in place where I want it, I'm going to locate it and then mark all of the weld through holes so that I can grind the metal and bare it, and then spray with zinc weld through primer. Now again, I'm just preparing this for when I'm going to weld that on. I'm not ready to weld the tail panel on yet because I still have to do some adjustments on the back of the quarter panels. Now that I have the tail panel set in what I believe to be the right location, I will set the deck lid on, and since it still has the original gasket on it, that's going to help line it up on these flanges and align it a little more. Now again, as I've showed in some previous videos, I will mock up or test fit the quarter panel extensions and make sure they line up properly with the deck lid. They may need some adjustment, but at least I can tell if the deck lid is fore and aft like it should be. It lines up very well. I already know that on the tail panel. The gap is even all the way across, and so at this point I can probably start welding. I thought I should show you this before I put the tail panel back in place. I noted earlier about the problem with the fitment here where the quarter panel meets the back of the tail panel flange, or whatever you want to call this part. And basically I drilled through the spot welds, not through this piece of metal, just through the spot welds. So it looked like this. It had this gap. And when I drilled through those welds, this piece pulled itself forward almost exactly where it needs to be. Now, the way to fix this, in my opinion, is to reshape this little flange right here so that it comes up further and does away with this corner out here. So I'm going to try to show you that. I'm going to use this, they call them body spoons, or there's different terms for them, but basically it came in a kit that I had. And what I want to do is come in the corner where I want it to curve up. So I'm going to set this in place and just tap. And work this part flat. I may even use a heavier bar to help shape that. I've got one of these. Fits in there okay. But basically I'm not changing anything as far as structure. I'm just changing the shape slightly. And you can see maybe a little bit, the corner is moved up. So now all I'll do is clamp that back together and weld those old spot welds shut, and that's going to set this right in place where it needs to be, and then the tail panel will fit on top, and that'll take care of that. And I'll do the same thing on the passenger side as well. Hope that helps. And just for reference, there's the passenger side, nice and straight. Now I did have to cut off, let me see if I can get some better light on here. I did have to cut off a little bit of material on this top side here, because this lower section was longer than it was on the driver's side. So I trimmed off, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch or so, and did the same thing with the hammer and dolly. And now I'll just re-weld that back together, and the tail panels, or the tail panel, should fit very nicely now. Okay, so one more thing I wanted to show you as I make progress on the back half of the car. I talked before about how the quarter panel doesn't match the filler panel. You can see it's just short, obviously not going to work. And I talked about how there's a flange down here that's rolled too far down. So my intention is to roll this back out, kind of reshape it, and then make it match. So it takes a little bit of effort. Let's see if I can't undo some of this. Now there you can see just how much, hopefully you can see just how much material is sticking down below. And I'm not too worried about back here. I don't want to change this shape so much. I need to just bring it back up the hill though, let's say. And because it's in a curve, it's going to be more challenging because the metal is already bent into that curve shape. But it has to be undone before I can do anything with it. Now, I'm going to kind of have to, in a way, guesstimate where I want this to end up, because it's kind of hard to lay a plane on here and get that angle the way I want it. Let me unroll this a little bit more. And this is definitely the time to do it. You don't want to do it when you're getting ready to put fine paint on something. So now I have a rough kind of idea. Now I'm going to want to fold that back over. Use the edge of my block to create the angle that I want. Hopefully you kind of get the idea with what I'm doing there. But anyway, that's the idea. Is I'm going to unfold that material, reshape it up to match this, and then I may play with this again back here, like I said, to get the plane. Kind of hard to show exactly the same, you know, as it should be, but well, I didn't like the way that was going. The problem I had was by moving them, unfolding it and moving the material taller, let's say, I was left with an exposed edge here and a seam, or what looks like a seam. It's actually the original fold, and I didn't like the way that was going to look. So I elected to just cut off this side of the flange, or cut off the flange or the fold, and I'm just making a new one. And what I'll do is weld that in, blend it, and I can trim the bottom of it to where it'll blend in nice, and it'll be really hard to tell that that was ever worked on. But sometimes you have to do different things you know, on the other side, on the passenger side, there was enough material there that it would hide that edge, and so I was good with that. But over here, it was so out of shape that it wouldn't have mattered what I did. It would have left this exposed and had this little tiny edge up here on top. So that's my plan. I'm going to weld that in and then blend it down. And there's the end result. Pretty happy with that. Looks a lot cleaner, blends in really nice. It gives it more of a finished look. So with that, really the last thing I have to do is install the actual weld on the tail panel, and that'll take care of the back half of the car. The other quarter is welded on and in place, so I guess I'll work on that tail panel. Alright, so these are the corner filler pieces, and as you can see, they're unpainted. I've seen different variations of these. These are basically Spectra Premium. This is for the left side, and that's for the right side. And you can see it's got Mustang Unlimited part numbers on those. But they also, I've used ones in the past that do have the EPD or EDP coating on it, the black ones, and they fit well. These fit fine too. I haven't really had much of an issue with these, except for they trim them a little bit long in places, and I'll show you what I mean by that. First off, I want to point out that these things are cut out with a plasma cutter, so you end up with a little bit of an edge on it, so you want to blend that off, and that's what I already did on the driver's side. And then if you'll see this black line up here, that has to be cut off, because when I fit this in, it's too tall, and that extra length actually hits the inside corner of the quarter panel. If you can see that or not, you'll be able to tell, but basically it's just too tall, so it'll hit. So I'm going to cut that off, and then this line here, and I'm going to also line on top here, is where it's going to go underneath of this folded area. And so to help that along, first what I'll do is I'll cut off this excess to make sure it fits just fine, and then if needed I'll cut that off, because it's a big piece, and it's really not going to help much to have that much material. But I'll look at it once I get this other piece cut off. And as you can see, I laid out a drill pattern so that when this is in place, all those will get welds and meet the flanges on this corner piece. Alright, well, I wanted to show you some details in doing these corner braces. As I've shown in the previous segment, this driver's side in particular was a lot taller, so I had cut off that top edge. And I also had some lines drawn here to where I was going to cut this off. If you look at it compared to the passenger side, you can see the difference in how much I cut off. And the reason for that is I wanted this edge tucked under this corner on the inside of the trunk opening, and I didn't want it would stick out into the trunk opening. So this is trimmed back to match with that. Along with that, I also flattened out this corner. You can see it gets fat, hopefully, and I flattened it out. The reason for that is this flange right here, and I'll show you in a second. When it compresses down, it would never fold over the big fat part as seen on this part on the passenger side. So I took it to my welding table and just took a hammer and just kind of flattened that out. And I also trimmed this down a little bit because it was a bit longer. So with that, I'll show you what I was mentioning here with this overlap. You can see it's all flat. When it gets back here, it has to just kind of roll over that a little bit. Other than that, you can see my drill pattern that I've laid out to weld this in, and I've also back sprayed everything with weld through primer. Hopefully you can see that. And then beyond that, I'm prepping to put in this trunk brace, and I'll show you that. There's trunk support. This holds the latch, and it also supports the tail panel. Now the convertible is different than the coupe. If you look at the shape here, the convertible has a heavy box back here, and the coupe, it's got a thinner tapered piece, and it's not even a real box. You can see it's got a lip here, and then it tapers forward, so it's completely different. And there's not much here underneath. It's just, you know, one piece. Whereas I think the convertible piece is a bit different. It has that kickback, but it also has that inner box shape. So the difference is the support brace is about 1 inch to 1.5 inches or so shorter on the end down here between a coupe and a convertible. So that said, I'm getting ready to put this in. So maybe you can see here, you can see the dimples where there were spot welds, 2 on each side. And what I've done is I've traced out the pattern of the, sorry, looking at the camera upside down, traced out the pattern here and then drilled some holes. And then that'll set me up for welding it back in. I've also drilled holes up here on top. And the other thing I want to point out is whenever I'm doing these sort of things, this corner that was created by the tail panel and the box, well, when the brace is in place, it kind of creates an area where you can't put in seam sealer very easily. So what I like to do, and as you can see here, I put some paint. Actually, I used some Krylon paint and primer together, and I just kind of poured it in there. I just wanted it to get in deep and run into that crevice or crack and try to soak in. And once that dries, I will put seam sealer behind that, or in that corner, at least behind the brace. I may not do all of it right now, but I want to get that section behind the support brace so that I'm not fighting with it later, because, you know, it's kind of hard to get back in there. So that's your opportunity to take care of that. And then the rest of it I can do later on as I move along. Let's see, one other thing I noticed on this side over here, it's got a little lip hanging down, which will have to be cut off because that'll interfere with the fitment of this corner brace on this side. Of course, the balance panel where all these welds are, those all need to be ground down and prepped because the balance panel has to fit flush. So make sure you blend those down. And another thing I'll point out is when it comes to fitting the balance panel, this will get in your way. This flange right here, so you'll have to do some cutting. Basically, you know, make a straight line down and get rid of this curve because it'll fight with the balance panel fitting on. I've run into that before, and I've shown that in other videos. And I guess it's just the way they make these things, but that's how it is. I'm going to weld in this corner brace, do a little more prep, and get this valance or tail panel brace in place. Well, that's the end for this segment. I don't know if this is part 8 or part 9. I have a lot of video to edit, or I have, by the time you see this, I will have edited a lot of video to make probably 2 videos. But anyway, as you can see, that corner piece is in. That's taken care of. I've also taken care of the seam sealer down there and welded in that support brace. And other than taking care of the bumper braces, which I'm not going to weld in yet, I don't want to make anything permanent until I actually have the bumpers, because if I need to fine-tune those and I haven't welded in, that doesn't help me. So those will come at a later date. Again, I still have some trimming to do down here, as I pointed out, and of course a lot of blending of welds and getting it ready for the next step. So again, this is the end of this segment, and the next probably in the next series I'll be working on the front end of the car. So we'll see how that turns out, and stay tuned. Thanks for watching.